Welcome back to the MizzouToday Show on On3 and Rivals. I'm your host, Kenny Van Doren. We're going to do things a little bit differently this week because it is a bye week for Mizzou football. Tigers are 5-0. We'll get into the heart of SEC play in Week 7 against Alabama, and we'll talk about that next week, preview it a little bit. Don't really want to talk too much about Alabama right now because there's a big matchup against Vanderbilt this weekend, and maybe that could change, the outlook on the Alabama game, what kind of Alabama team is going to roll into Columbia the following Saturday. But it's just going to be, of course, just Kyle, McAreavy, and I. Did I do it right? No, I didn't.
McAreavy. You nailed it the last 2 weeks, though.
Yeah, my issue is that I've been saying it wrong for so many months, and it's been a year. I mean, happy birthday to Mizzou today. Mizzou today is officially 1 year old, and so Kyle and I will be doing this, but it's going to be a little bit different if you're watching with us on the YouTube. I just switched this because Kyle is now the host. We're going to be talking about football recruiting in the class of 2026. Mizzou's still trying to fill out its class, and Kyle has some questions. It might be some similar questions to what other people have, and he'll take it from here.
Well, I thought I was going to surprise you by calling out that it's our first birthday as a site. But before we get into it, I just want to say thanks to the people who have stuck with us. I know the early transition, there was some confusion just with everything going on, and we really appreciate everyone who stuck with us and everybody who's joined along the way. It's been a great year and excited for a lot more. But first off, we'll stick with the offense, look at the recruiting for the class of 2026, and probably just go position by position. So best place to start is always the quarterback. We know the Tigers have Gavin Sidwar as a commit for next year. And my main question, quarterback-wise, looking at recruiting, teams always want to get their guy in every class. It was Matt Zollers last year. He's now the backup quarterback as a true freshman. What do you see as the benefit to getting that guy in each class and continuing to have new guys rotating through when really, if best case scenario plays out, the job is Matt Zollers's for the next, maybe not starting next year, but starting the next year for 3 years after that. And then you only get Sidwar really for 1 year.
The unique situation about this all, especially just in quarterback recruiting under Drinkwitz, and is that he's never had one of his own recruits be the starter. He's had his own transfers. He had Bo Perbula start. He had Brady Cook start. And Brady Cook committed under Odom and just stuck with his commitment because one of the biggest things that he always talked about is he committed to the University of Missouri, not just to the staff. And he always wanted to be the Tigers quarterback. So you go from 2022 to 2023. He had Bazelak in there as well, who was a rollover from the Odom era too. And so never really had his guy. And it's kind of in this one of the situations that they've made a real good run on Pennsylvania quarterbacks, getting very familiar with the Pennsylvania quarterbacks. For those who don't know, the quarterbacks coach at LaSalle is Tim Taggart. Tim Taggart was Matt Zoller's personal quarterback coach for a couple years in high school, and still very close to this day. And that necessarily doesn't make, those guys comparable at all. I think they're still very different quarterbacks in Gavin Sidwar and Matt Zollers. Zollers can really leave the pocket, use his legs. One big thing that they always talk about with Sidwar is that he's more of like, a pocket passer. He can move up in the pocket. He's very smart about knowing what is on his backside, what is coming at him from left and right, just defensive ends wise, or even up the middle with the linebackers and the tackles. And so that's one of those things that, they have a lot of familiarity just in the Pennsylvania area, same quarterbacks coach. And, I think there's a lot more that at LaSalle with Brett Gordon, who's the coach there. And, I think that's one of those things that there's just a lot behind Sidwar. And I think that's one thing that they like about him is he's just a very smart quarterback. I think he doesn't really care about the national stage anymore. He's locked in with Missouri. Ole Miss was trying to get involved a little bit more near the end of the summer, but, he turned him down. He said, I'm going to Missouri. He's the longest tenured commit. They had 2 commits before him, and Anthony Kennedy Jr. and DeMonte Timms, who both decommitted, going to Miami and Colorado respectively as of right now. But this guy's locked in. And I think the thing you want to look from there is that, if this Bo Perbula possibly coming back for a second year, you want to keep Zollers in the fold. You get Zollers to start as possibly a redshirt sophomore, if they kind of keep a redshirt on one of those years. And then you really just kind of go down the list. And the one thing you want a quarterback every cycle doesn't mean they're going to play. That's the one thing that you really have to understand kind of moving forward is that, yes, you want to hit on your guy. And there was about 3 quarterbacks they were really looking at, like Jet Damala, who went to Iowa State. And, at one point they thought he was going to be their top guy coming in, or, down the stretch. He committed to Iowa State, ended up flipping Alabama. So I think Mizzou was probably happy that they ended up with a guy that, didn't really have any suitors push him out of the commitment. And I think they feel really good about where they stand with Sidwar.
Well, that kind of led into and answered the second question I had at quarterback there, which is, are there any other kind of targets in the mix for the Tigers right now, just in case something were to change for Sidwar down the line? Or is it, the chips are in on Sidwar, he's the guy, and it seems like he's as committed to that as the Tigers are?
Yeah, I think the chips are in. Sean Gleason is supposed to go see him on Saturday, for a big game against St. Joseph's for LaSalle and Sidwar. And Sidwar's coming off his first loss of the year, really trying to, knock off some rust and, get back into it against, very, very strong opponent. It's going to be good to have, Gleason there, the quarterback's coach, just see how he's progressing, see how he's doing. Not really anyone else out there with Sidwar really bought in and just focusing on high school. I think they like where they stand. I mean, of course, they like where they stand. That's what I mean there. Even The Athletic wrote a good story about, the quarterbacks that stood out in the 2026 class. And one player personnel director said, hey, like, this is a guy that we think if he, the system's right, he's going to control it. Like, he's a very smart quarterback. They thought he was even had better attributes than Zollers right now as a freshman. They like what he could do under Kirby Moore's offense. And that's something that Sidwar has been told before. He's a very smart quarterback. Maybe he doesn't have, the greatest skills just yet. Maybe needs some time just in a college system to really fine tune what he has. But he's a very intelligent quarterback. And I think that's what the Tigers really liked about him the most.
All right. Well, let's move to running back now. The Tigers have a commitment from Maxwell Warner, but as I know you've talked about before, the Tigers like to have 2 running backs per cycle. Last year was Marquise Davis and Brendan Haygood. I guess my question first is just, who are the targets that the Tigers are still looking at, and what do you see coming down the line for that group?
Yeah, the only one right now is TJ Hodges, still uncommitted. He wanted to make a decision, make up his mind, get things figured out after his official visits. He officially visited Missouri on June 6th, went out to see Baylor and Louisville recently. But this seems like one that Mizzou probably has in the bag coming Saturday. He's going to make his decision on October 4th. I don't have a time yet for that, but this is one of those ones where I feel like they would have taken him, sooner. He had to figure out some things just like off the field, get things settled so he can make a commitment and be ready to go to college. It looks like he's got it done. The guy can do it all. I mean, that's one big thing that Mizzou has talked about with him is that, he can be a pass catching back. He's one of more of those all-purpose options. And they saw maybe an opportunity to get him involved in an all-purpose way early on. He's a guy that wants to go to college and just make an impact right away and be on the field. He seems like a pretty fearless player too, just from the clips I've seen, but he gets very involved in the passing game, running as well, as a running back. And I think once they get him, I think Curtis Luper has his duo for the 2026 class, if they get him.
So that brings up a similar question that I had with quarterback. At running back, the Tigers have Ahmad Hardy and Jamal Roberts, who are both sophomores. Marquise Davis has started working in, at least against the cupcake opponents, and seems to have, as much talent as you could want. I know in the transfer portal era, it can always boil down to the argument of you don't really know who's going to be on the roster next year. But for a guy like Hodges, who you're saying wants to come in and make an impact immediately, do you think having that amount of young talent already in the room, who, the expectation would be that you'd want to hang on to all of it, he'd come in kind of far down the depth chart. Do you think that affects the decision?
I don't necessarily think so, because when you see the production that the Mizzou running backs have done, especially at a young age, I think, that's very enticing. And there's a lot of, not hype, but understanding of what Curtis Luper can get you to do pretty early on in your college career. I think that's also just one of those things that just checks off a box for a guy like this who wants to come in and play right away, make an impact in any way he can. And, with what Curtis Luper has been able to accomplish and really picked up that relationship with him this summer after Al Davis was, probably the more primary guy before they really picked up steam with Hodges throughout those last couple of months. And he has 2 predictions for Missouri right now. on 3 in Rivals. And so I think just the Tigers feel good about it. You never really know, what this running back room will look like next year. I mean, guys stick around. Tavoris Jones has stuck around, and he ended up, having a pretty good game against UMass, seeing a lot more production and opportunities in that kind of game. And you just don't know who's going to stick around because, Quan Lacey, made an impact, looked like he was going to be the running back of the future. He got an opportunity at Ole Miss and he took that instead. So with the 1-year deals that these kind of players really look at, they come in and you just see how they kind of mesh and how well they can, put on weight. Because one of the big things about a lot of these running backs is they're pushing 200 pounds or more. And, kind of see how that works for TJ Hodges too, once he gets into the program, if he chooses Mizzou.
Yeah, no, that was something that Curtis Looper really emphasized when I got the chance to talk to him before the season. But let's look over at the receivers. You got the Tigers have commitments from Jabari Brady and is it Devin Hill-Lomax?
Devion, yeah.
Devion, okay. Does it seem like 2 is probably the number they're going to stick with in that room, especially after getting 3 last year? Or are there more targets that you see the Tigers going after currently?
I thought they'd be done at 2. They really liked Mason James during the summer, but Washington just ended up being the better choice for him. And he was supposed to visit for the South Carolina game, but he told Mizzou Today and Steve Wiltfong of Rivals as well that he wasn't going to make that trip. And he ended up going to Washington this past weekend and going back up there, and looked like he was having a good time just from what he shared on social media. So maybe another wide receiver pops up in the next couple of months. They didn't get Demarion Folks into the fold until the end of the 2025 or 2024 season, the 2025 class, and he's kind of making an impact early on, already burned his red shirt. So we'll see if another wide receiver pops up, but those 2 guys are pretty locked in. Devion was back on campus, hanging out with the guys on the sidelines for homecoming, and then Jabari Brady was at the South Carolina game, and he was very excited to see his first game day visit with the Tigers. But both those guys are very bought in right now.
Okay, we'll scoot over to tight end. We got a commitment from Isaac Jensen currently. It seems like 1 tight end is generally the spot, unless I can't remember if there was a second last year with no, just the 1. Okay. Do you think is there anything else to really look out for at tight end for Mizzou?
No, not really. It was Durham Cato's first full off season as a tight ends coach, so he kind of went pretty hard on trying to get guys on official visits, and ended up getting the guy that he wanted in Isaac Jensen. I mean, sources said that they were just kind of looking at 1 tight end for now. It looked like, with how many guys they're trying to put on campus, that maybe they would get a second one. But when you get, some guys in the transfer portal kind of filling those holes and needs, I think they just kind of said, hey, we'll just take 1 now. And Isaac Jensen, who they really wanted, 6'6", 225 pounds, really seeing an uptick in passes and or receptions and touchdowns and yards at Millard South, which is just a behemoth of a football team. Even Isaac was telling me, he's like, and the heck, it's hard for me to get the ball, and we score in 2 plays. So they are just steamrolling teams in Nebraska right now, and they're going to keep doing it until the back end of the season. And he's been a good part of it. They actually let him run the ball in from like the 2-yard line recently, just on like a kind of like a fake quarterback looking over to the sideline trying to get the play, and he just pulled up under center and ran the ball in. So he's a very fun one. He's been back at campus twice this year for the Border War and homecoming. Got to talk with him and his dad. They said they got to meet DeMarcus Johnson, who we'll get to on the defensive side of the ball. They were like, man, that guy is just huge. And I met DeMarcus too on the field, and he is massive as well. And Isaac already kind of stands out as just an already big built pass catcher as a high schooler. And that was just funny to hear.
Yeah, and it seems like tight end's a position that the Tigers kind of have where they want at this point. They got assumedly another season of Brett Norfleet and Jordan Harris next year. And then you got guys like Gavin Hoffman and Jude James coming down the line after that, Dakota Terrell. So, there's a lot in that room. I think one ad is probably the right move there. But looking over at the offensive line, you got 3 interior offensive line commits in Brandon Anderson, Khalif Canty Jr., and Braylon Ellison, but no tackles at this point. Just what do you make overall of the offensive line group that the Tigers have in the 26th class so far?
I think those 3 guys are pretty locked in as well. I mean, it's hard to pull Braylon Ellison away from Mizzou. He's a Boonville kid. His dad went to the Tigers. He's right down the road. He makes it back to pretty much every game. I think he's been every game this year except the Thursday night opener, because he had a football game the next day and had something to attend to for the Boonville Pirates the night before, just before their season opened. So he's pretty locked in there as well. Khalif Canty, Greg Smith, the Midwest national recruiting analyst, has spoken about it a bunch. He really thinks he's like the hidden gem of this class, and there's going to be guys already ahead of him that are ranked higher than him. But before the merger, he was in the Rivals 250 with guys like Gavin Sidwar, and Harris as well at the linebacker spot, and Keenan Harris, who's a SLU product. So there's been some guys that have gotten some good recognition nationally, and those two are pretty locked in. You got Brandon Anderson as well, who seems to still share a lot positives about Mizzou. He hasn't made it back to campus just yet. Still trying to see when that could be. Cliff Canty was looking at possibly the Texas A&M game or Mississippi State in the next couple of weeks, or Alabama. Just one of those the three final home games to make it back to campus. He's had a good start to his season up there at Cass Tech in Detroit. Another interior guy that they're looking at is Iowa State defensive lineman commit Bryson Wessel, who was on campus. He received an offer from the Tigers. He's decided not to report it or put it out there. He's more of a reserved guy. I think he's just trying to navigate this situation his own way. And the Tigers see him as a center, so he is a defensive line commitment for Iowa State, but Mizzou sees him on the interior. Jackson, Missouri, of course, the current center for the Tigers, Connor Tollison, kind of a mentor to Bryson, and they got to talk, during that visit and also at camp this past summer, which that's how he got on the radar of the Tigers. And Jack Abercrombie, the assistant line coach, very involved on this one, and they like him. It's just necessarily like, are they going to take him? Are they going to flip that commitment? Bryson was back at Iowa State this past weekend after visiting Mizzou for the South Carolina game, and he's expected to be back for the Texas A&M game on November 8th. Last guy I'll point out on the offensive line is Johnny Jones, former UCLA commit. Florida State's involved here among some other schools. He was at Mississippi State as well, but he was at the South Carolina game for an official visit. Seems to like, Brandon Jones a good amount. And, he has some connections on the team with Donovan Olubade and Damon Wilson, who went to Venice High School in Florida, where he's playing his senior year right now. And so there's some good relationships already with the team. And I thought it was funny. He did point out the PFF grades when he was talking to Steve Wiltfong just on what he liked. And I was like, I don't know if that's necessarily something that Mizzou is posting or if something he's like looked into, but I thought that was interesting. He really liked how the Tigers were grading out. Another offensive lineman that's kind of popped up more recently, even though he didn't put the Tigers in his top 6, is Jared Dowdy. He's still expected for that November 8th official visit, but I mean, he has, a lot of options right now with Georgia, Auburn, and Alabama now in the mix. He's a former Georgia State commit, and everything is just taken off for him this fall.
So I guess kind of last question about the offense, sticking with that offensive line, what do you think about kind of the lack of the exterior targets, those tackle targets? That was a pretty big issue for the Tigers coming into this season. Had to go out and look for replacements at both tackles, kind of because a lot of the developmental guys within the program have not lived up to, becoming the starting quality guys at those positions. It seems to have worked out fine so far to this point, especially once Caden Green returns. Keegan Trost has been fantastic, but realistically, there's a better than moderate chance that you're going to have to replace both tackles again next season, and also left guard and center. So, there's a good chance that you're looking at an 80% flip on the offensive line next year, and not bringing in any tackles in the class is something that's caught my eye, we'll say. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I wouldn't say like any of these guys that maybe they're looking at are going to be like Armand Membu, who really fights for an opportunity to start as a freshman. I'm interested to see, of course, Keegan Trost will be out of eligibility. Once Caden Green is back, will he have enough tape and enough experience this year where he is still garnering attention to be in the NFL draft in a spot where, I think he'll still garner attention, but is it in a spot that he wants to go? Yeah, I think that's going to be the question I have as well. And, he's really just missing some, lower end play against UMass, but he's going to possibly miss that Alabama game as well. And so once he gets in the SEC play, and I was talking to a draft analyst recently, and he said, I'm not really going to talk about offensive linemen until I get enough tape. And that could come, late October, early November on what he's actually seeing before, they'll assess and see where some of these guys stand come draft time. But from that, like you were saying, if they get a guy like Johnny Jones, I think they're in a good shape. They probably will address this again in the transfer portal, see who's out there and see if they can replace the right tackle or left tackle spot. And, will Richardson step up and be an option as that this year in this coming spring? And not get passed up at all. Maybe that's in the fold as well, or they kind of lean on some other guys that are coming up, like Whit Hayford, Jack Lang, whoever else could be coming down the tracks. That's a little bit fresher and newer to those spots in the college ranks. Another guy that's kind of popped up, and I know a lot of people really liked him, and I thought he was, very good head on his shoulders, Evan Goodwin. He's an SMU commit. Mizzou still keeping tabs, just, keeping that door open, just line of communication if anything were to change for him. And, they looked at other guys like Noah Best too on the interior, but, with how many interior guys they have, and, still keeping tabs on Bryson Wessel, who's Iowa State commit. I think maybe that door isn't as open, and he always kind of seemed like an Oklahoma lean.
All right. I think that's all I've got for the offense. So I think after a quick break, we'll flip over to the defensive side.
Yep. This comes from our sponsors at Rhoback Activewear. There's only one way to describe Rhoback: best feel, best fit. For those who aren't familiar with Rhoback, they're completely changing the game with their incredibly comfortable activewear. Rhoback has released so many items within their new licensed game day collection, and it's our favorite. If you're watching with us on the YouTube, you can tell Kyle and I both have some Rhoback on right now with the quarter zip and the Hezi hoodie with novel polo designs and clean hoodie and Q-zip designs. For some of your favorite schools, it's definitely worth checking out. Nobody else on the market is pairing these level of custom designs with this quality of activewear. And Kyle, I'll tell you, I was walking through campus during homecoming, and I hope people had used that code, because I saw a lot of Rhoback tags and logos all over campus. Rhoback's everyday shorts or their Delta Performance pants are the perfect pairing as well. They're both super comfortable, have an elastic waistband and great fabric that is made to have the appearance of a nice short look, but the comfort for a day on the move. Rhoback has also been proudly leading the NIL charge, having signed partnerships with multiple college football stars, past and present, and are becoming the go-to brand for college athletics across the country. Use the code MIZ20 on Rhoback.com for a generous 20% off all new customers through the end of this week. That's spelled RHOBACK.com. That's 20% off all performance polos, shorts, and even more with code MIZ20. Kyle, you want to take it away?
All right. Well, we talked about the offense, and I'll point out the Tigers have 12 total commits right now, and 8 of them are on the offensive side. So we'll do probably a little more kind of general talk on the defensive side than actual, analysis of who's already committed, since there's just not as many guys. And 2 of them were pretty recent commits. Those are the 2 defensive line commits in DeMarcus Johnson and Micah Nickerson, both within the past week. So I guess just defensive line in general, what are you hearing about who the Tigers are still targeting? How much do they want to add edge versus tackle? Just where is that group kind of stand at this point?
Yeah, it's cool. Like they checked off 2 boxes on the edge rusher spot. They had 2 edges in the 2025 class, getting Javion Hilson on the first day of the early signing period. So they got both the guys that they wanted there, and an in-stater as well to kind of wrap up the 2025 class with Dayton Hopkins. But getting Micah Nickerson, who's the highest ranked recruit for the Tigers, 151. It's what the number he debuted in the Rivals 300 update recently. He's a 4-star now, number 6 recruit in the state of Mississippi, and number 20th at his position. DeMarcus Johnson, another just big, defensive lineman, going to stick on the outside most likely at 6'8", 260 pounds. Longtime target of Brian Early, just going back to the Houston days. Composite 4-star, number 2 nationally among the JUCO ranks. Number 2 is position, number 2 in his state. Kind of tells you how good some of those Kansas JUCO guys are. But yeah, so I think it's a good spot for Missouri to be in, to kind of get those checked off. And you look at the rest of the defensive line, you lose a guy like Anthony Kennedy Jr. after Al Davis resigned as the defensive line coach. And that kind of puts you in a spot where let's bring him back during the summer. Let's bring Danny Beal into the fold, someone that they've been targeting for a long time. And both those guys end up choosing other schools in Miami and Oklahoma State, respectively. Still keeping tabs, of course, on Danny Beal with the changes at Oklahoma State. But that doesn't mean necessarily that they're going to get him or kind of pull him away. So they look like they're in a good spot with some of these other guys that have visited recently. Jalen Battle, who's still a Baylor commit, wanted to see what Missouri was about and liked what he heard and saw from the Tigers. And he's from Edmond, Oklahoma. And another guy they hosted this past weekend, and Taj Overton was a little bit of a surprise one they got on campus. He's from Owasso, Oklahoma. It's the same school that produced Chris McClellan, so they kind of dapped up, and his family got to see him on the sideline, so that was a cool moment for them. And Sam Spiegelman of Rivals put in a flip projection for Missouri to end up getting Taj Overton. There's no timetable on that right now; it's just kind of getting ahead of it because Mizzou feels like they're in a good spot for Taj Overton. So some of the guys on the defensive line that they're looking at right now.
I guess just numbers wise, defensive tackle was a position that was talked about a good bit kind of coming into the season because the Tigers didn't really attack it in the transfer portal outside of Braylon Henderson in the spring portal. You've got a number of guys this year who were done or out of eligibility, with Chris McClellan, Henderson, and I believe Sterling Webb as well. You're going to be asking a lot from either going out and attacking the transfer portal this year or from guys who have been in the program for a long time. What are your thoughts on there being no current commits in that group? And just what do you think numbers wise the Tigers would like to get to this year? Best case scenario.
I think ideal wise, I think you're set on defensive end. A guy like Ashari Charles was someone they really liked. He has connections to the program through David Blackwell, who's done a really good job. He's a defensive tackles coach, recruiting down there in Florida, recruiting Venice guys. He helped get Damon Wilson, helped Brian Early reel him in from Georgia in the offseason. And, another guy, Ronell Johnson, right down the road in Kansas City area. He committed to Indiana after his official visits. Another edge rusher. Steve Wilfong reported that Missouri was still interested, but with two edges in the fold, two very strong edges, one that could probably make more of an impact right away. DeMarcus Johnson. I think you're in a good spot there. Defensive tackle wise on the interior, I think you probably want two is the ideal number. They had one last year, and you look at it, if you can get Jalen Battle flipped and Taj Overton flipped, I think you're pretty set. You feel pretty strong about that on the interior.
All right, moving back to linebacker, the Tigers have Keenan Harris committed. He's one of the longer tenured guys in the commit group now. Just what are your thoughts on Harris in general? And then who are some other guys that, the Tigers are looking to add to the class in that group?
Yeah, you don't really have to worry about Keenan. He's very bought in as well. Nicholson and Drinkwitz, of course, went to go see him for the SLU DeSmet rivalry game earlier in September. Got to see them, and he was pretty excited about it. And Mizzou also got to see some other top players, and Anthony Busby, Rich James in that game. Tyke Davis, of course, playing on the other side, a former Target, going to Michigan at the moment. So you feel good about that. They've been trying to pair a second linebacker, some guys that popped up in the 2026 class or last couple of months. More recently, DQ Forkba visited this past weekend, and I like DQ. I got to meet him in June at Rivals 5-Star, and he told me then, Mizzou hadn't, really been in contact with him much, and they had reoffered him when Nicholson took over, and they had reoffered in May, so a couple months into his tenure with the Tigers. Nothing really picked up from there, but conversations picked back up this offseason. Earlier in this fall with Nicholson, kind of looking for that second linebacker, and Forkbush kind of taking a step back in his recruitment, delaying his commitment and opening it up to look at some of these other schools. Florida State got a visit. He'll be at Maryland in October. And, if Mizzou can get him, I think they're in good shape. He's kind of ranked highly by ESPN, but kind of fallen out of some other spots, but still a composite 4-star in the industry rankings. And I think that would be a good one. He seemed like he was having a good time just on the sideline too, getting to see that emotion from Nicholson, Coach D-Nick, who really just kind of exudes a lot of that. And a lot of the guys kind of buy into it. Another one to keep your eyes on is Braylon Hodge. He's lined up a Mizzou official visit for November 8th. He also told Mizzou Today that he's expecting Coach Nicholson to be at his game this week. So he's one that's kind of being coveted by a lot of programs with Texas, Oregon, and Michigan also getting involved. He's a Colorado product, but he's currently committed to Michigan State. But that's more so the outlook on the linebacker spot right now.
Now, you mentioned they don't have to worry about Keenan Harris maybe decommitting or flipping anything like that. Does anybody have to worry about Eli Drinkwitz wanting to move him to running back and needing to add 2 other linebackers?
Yeah, that is funny. I did hear that Drinkwitz was having a good time watching Harris, who plays both ways for SLU. They have a package the junior Billikens do called the Hellcat, and they just give the ball to him, and he just runs up the middle, and it's very hard to stop him. Post a video where he just does. It's very hard to tackle him. It seems like he just keeps running his feet. He'll push guys off of him, and Drinkwitz just looked like he loved it the entire time, and giving Coach D Nick a hard time about that at the same time, just from what I saw on the sidelines.
All right, we'll flip to corner now. There's no current commits in the group, and this is another group where the Tigers have a bunch of kind of older guys out there. Stephen Hall, Toriano Pride, Drayden Norwood, all out of eligibility after this season. From what I know, Stephen Hall might end up with more depending on JUCO rulings down the line. But then you got Nick DeLoach, Shamar McNeil, Mark Manfred, Cameron Keys lined up after that. So a group that going into next year is kind of lacking experience. Once again, probably going to have to go attack the transfer portal, look for a couple of options there. But with no current commits, what do you see coming down the line for the Tigers in the cornerback room?
I think I was a little bit surprised that Nick Hankins chose Illinois during the summer. Mizzou felt really good about him. Good relationship with Al Pogue. They sent a lot of staffers to see him multiple times, and even his dad had a good relationship with Al Pogue as well. So I was a little bit surprised by that one. Javonte Smith, not necessarily. He just is such a good athlete. And I think, he had an opportunity to stay close to home. He's from Jackson, Tennessee. He chose the Volunteers during the summer. They originally looked at like a wide receiver target. He ended up flipping to cornerback for that. And Mizzou was really involved in both those guys' recruitments. And coming into the fall, it was like, okay, let's try to make up some ground. It was just kind of like where the Tigers are going from there. And you kind of look at some of these guys that were visiting just at the cornerback spot. Jaden Swanson, he's originally from Muskogee, Oklahoma, goes to Northeast Oklahoma A&M, which might be a familiar one because Mizzou does have a kicker from there now. There's familiarity with that, and they're producing a lot of good JUCO products that are going to the Division I level now from that school. And so, he looked like one, maybe there was going to be, possible decision made, but Mizzou still keeping its options open, hosted a couple cornerbacks this past weekend, and CJ Hester and Ahmad Billings. And Ahmad is kind of an interesting case because he's really seeing his recruitment kind of take off a little bit more. He's expected at Florida this weekend, but Mizzou's the only Power 4 offer there right now, and there's very good relationship with the connections to Alabama, and Mizzou has a lot of overlap from people close to Ahmad and close to Al Pogue that know each other, and so I think they feel like they're in a good spot. But Ahmad's still feeling things out, and said he kind of wants to make a decision ultimately in the next couple of weeks. With CJ Hester, he's still very locked in with Mizzou or with Florida, and he'll be back at Florida this weekend. I think guys are just kind of on him just in case. A lot of schools are still talking to him, and if things change at Florida, coaching wise, will he be opening up anything? But just from his comments that he had with Steve Wiltfong, didn't seem like too much really happened for him. Just kind of got to see Mizzou up close and kind of catch up with Hilson, who he was teammates with at Cocoa in Florida. But that's kind of where cornerback stands at the moment.
Do you think best case scenario for the Tigers there is another 2-man group, like we've talked about at a couple other spots?
Yeah, only one last year, Mark Manfred. This year, I think, ideally you'd probably want 2 because they were looking for a younger guy in the spring portal to take that spot when they lost Jaron Sensabaugh to the transfer portal and going to North Carolina State. Just someone with a couple years of experience that they could just put on the roster, let him, kind of develop and get ready to take over a starting spot one day. I think ideally you want 2, and I think you're still going to have to address it when come portal time this winter.
Yeah, I agree with that. We'll look at our last position and our last commit with the safeties, and the Tigers have Tony Forney committed. This was another group that only got 1 commit last year with CJ Bass, but the Tigers did go hard in the transfer portal and brought in a few guys with multiple years of eligibility left. So not a position where you're going to have as much turnover next year, but still a position, Dalen Carnell and Jalen Catalon will both be out of eligibility. And, you're going to have to, start a new era of the safeties. It feels like the past couple of years have been Dalen Carnell's lead. So next year, going to have to be a new guy leading the room. Just what do you see from that group of safeties? And do you think any more are on the way?
Yeah, I think ideally you just want one more. I think if they had landed Jaden McGregory in July, as kind of previously expected before Louisville jumped back into that one and took over their recruitment, I think you'd just be like, okay, this is fine. Kind of moving forward. You don't have to worry about 2040, in my opinion. I think he's very locked in. And I think, from a special teams point of view, I think he might be a guy that makes an early impact if he gets on campus early and gets, in a good spot. Maybe he can help out that unit with Eric Link and Jacob Yoro, just seeing what he could do on special teams. And Coach Yoro, I think I know that they're still trying to work with Jaden McGregory, still looking at him as a possible flip candidate. They really liked him during the summer, and Jaden liked his visit as well. And, he's in a spot where, he has two good programs that he can go to, and, either the ACC or the SEC, and kind of keeping that door open is Missouri. And so I think that's where you kind of stand at the safety spot. Some other guys that have visited recently, Brody Jones, who's committed to Cincinnati. He's listed as a cornerback, but he's reported his offer from Coach Yoro, and he's tagged him in a couple or in his posts about Mizzou. And I think from a safety point of view, I think that's where he is with Missouri and what they're kind of looking at.
I said that would be our last position, but I know you're a big special teams guy. So why don't, I know it's not looked at as much as offense and defense commit wise. Could you explain for the people a little bit just what to expect specialist wise, if there aren't, necessarily targets to talk about? Just at what point do those positions kind of really come into play recruiting wise?
It's always very random. I think they got Robert Meyer pretty early into the year, or maybe even during the summer. You don't get, maybe a long snapper until a couple weeks before the end of the season. So I don't really have any names for you right now. I kind of talked with a kicker punter recently that put in the Mizzou recruiting notebook from the 2027 class. But right now it looked like they were kind of offering some guys late in 2026, trying to sway them, trying to get on their radar before they committed elsewhere. But some of those targets ended up at Georgia Tech and Texas, and I think Toledo too, one of them. But yeah, I think that's just where things kind of stand, is that Mizzou really doesn't have any top guys that I know about right now on the specialist side.
All right. And then I guess just one final question from me. The Tigers got 2 commits this past week. Do you see any more kind of coming early October that people should be on the lookout for? Anything that you think is going to be, not necessarily on the horizon, but coming up pretty quick?
Yeah, TJ Hodges will be Saturday. That's what he chose as his decision time. He's a top 6. Schools in there, Oklahoma State, which I don't think will be one that he probably is considering as much right now, with Baylor and Louisville, or schools that he visited recently. And I think, Mizzou's in a good spot there. And if he ends up committing to Mizzou, it probably would be wrapped up on running backs. And some other ones you just got to keep your eyes on, Taj Overton, Jalen Battle. If anything changes with their commitments to Oklahoma State and Baylor respectively, then those would be ones to really monitor. But date-wise, TJ Hodges is the only one that has something set at the moment.
All right. Do you think there's anything else that the people need to know about recruiting-wise for Mizzou right now?
I would say maybe the class outlook is probably 18 to 20. Mizzou just kind of wants, its group, and then, address what they can in the transfer portal, build a foundation through the high school ranks, and then retool and address what else you need that you didn't get first time around at the high school ranks from guys that want opportunities to play right away, that are transfers and experienced.
All right. Well, I think that'll do it. Do you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, thanks again for taking over today, Kyle, and thanks again for tuning in with us. We'll be back next week for a preview for the Alabama game as the SEC play fully takes over the Missouri schedule, and Kyle wrote about that here on Wednesday on MizzouToday. Go read that as his Wednesday column. But we will see you guys then, and enjoy the bye week.